Hello, welcome again to Letchworth Cable Access. I'm Kyle Adamczak, and tonight we're on location here in the gallery of the Arts Council of Wyoming County in Perry, and we have a special guest tonight. It's Tex Wyndham, who is a nationally known jazz musician. He specializes in traditional jazz, ragtime, Dixieland. He plays piano, plays cornet, does solo performances, leads a band, is a guest artist in other all-star bands. He's a staple on the traditional jazz circuit. He's performed internationally in Europe and Canada and all across the United States. He's many CD recordings, I think almost 20 of them. He's an author, music critic, and he's a winner of many jazz fan popularity polls. So we're pleased to have him here. He performed at the Arts Council in early August, and that's when we caught up with him for this interview. Thank you for joining us, Tex.
Pleasure to be here, Kyle.
Could you just define for us what ragtime music is?
Sure. Ragtime is America's first popular native-born art form. It came along in the mid to late 1890s, came out of the Missouri Valley, where it was developed by black piano players who were playing in saloons, gambling houses, brothels, and other low-life areas of the big cities in the Missouri Valley. And the defining characteristic of ragtime is playing a syncopated melody over a march rhythm. That creates a sort of ragged time.
So ragtime, that's where it comes from, ragged time. Now, you're going to perform for us 3 examples of the different types of music during what historians call the golden age of Tin Pan Alley. What was Tin Pan Alley?
Tin Pan Alley was started out as 28th Street in New York City in the late 1880s, where all of the music publishers in the city at that time were congregated. They were between Broadway and 8th Avenue. And this was before the days of air conditioning. So in the summer, they all had their windows open. And if you walked down that block in the summertime, what you heard was a cacophony of musical sounds, mostly pianos. You had arrangers who worked for the publishers. They were working out the arrangements that were going to be in the published scores. You had song pluggers who worked for the publishers who were demonstrating music to variety artists who dropped in to pick up new things for their acts. And you had composers who had dropped in and were trying to sell the songs to the publishers for publication. And a commentator, a fellow named Monroe Rosenfeld, took a little walk down that block, and he wrote in his column that what he heard sounded like a bunch of people banging on tin pans. And the name stuck, and it became the affectionate nickname for the commercial song publishing industry as it existed from about that time until the music changed in 1950s and rock and roll took over the hit parade. And then people stopped writing songs with a view toward having them published in sheet music form. Now if a person writes a pop song, he writes it primarily with a view toward having one of these top 40 artists record it.
Okay, what's the first song that you're going to perform for us?
It's a tune called Black and White Rag. It was composed in 1908. It was a very popular rag back then, and it's a very important rag in ragtime history because it was recorded in San Francisco in December of 1941 at a time when ragtime was deader than a doornail and everybody was listening to big band swing. But the record was a hit, and it started a revival of interest in ragtime that continues down to the present day. I mean, I wouldn't be here in Perry if it wasn't for the fact that back in December of 1941, a pianist named Wally Rose recorded this song.
All right, well, we'll fade to black, and I'll get out of the way, and we'll listen to Black and White Rag. that was The Black and White Rag. Who composed that song?
It was composed by a Tin Pan Alley ragtimer named George Botsford, Botsford, who I think actually was from around here. I believe he was originally from Rochester.
Well, that is interesting. In fact, Rochester and Buffalo in this part of the state have a lot of composers like Harold Arland and others, but I'll let you look them up for yourself. How did you become interested in this? When you were growing up, the popular music was big band or was rock and roll?
When I was growing up, you could turn on the radio, and they didn't have the situation on radio that they have now where the stations specialize. You know, now they have top 40 and gospel and country. But back in the 40s, you'd turn on the radio and you'd hear a little bit of everything. You might hear a country tune, then you'd hear Dinah Shore, and then the Andrews Sisters, and then a jazz tune. And when I was in junior high school, I heard some piano music on the radio. And I didn't know what it was, but I thought it sounded wonderful. And I went down to the biggest music store in my hometown, Wilmington, Delaware, and they had the last song plugger in the city. She had, a counter of music and a piano there. And I started talking to this lady. Here I was this little kid, and I'd heard this music, didn't know what it was, but she was very patient, and she figured out that I was probably talking about ragtime. And she went in the back, hauled out, I think, the only 2 rags that she had. The ragtime wasn't in print, and played it for me. And I said, yeah, that's it. And I bought the 2 tunes and took it from there.
All right. So you taught yourself how to perform in the style?
Yeah, pretty much. I had about 1.5 years of piano lessons.
Really, just 1.5 years of formal lessons is all?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure you could call them formal lessons. The way I was taught to play the piano, they sent a thing around to my parents that said, teach your kid to play the piano in the public schools. And what we did, we went into a room, and there was 1 piano in the room. And on top of the piano was a electric keyboard, and she would push a note on the piano and it would light up on this electric keyboard. And what we had was a block of wood that was carved to look like a piano keyboard, and we would place our fingers on this block of wood, and once a period we came up to the real piano to see if we were doing it right. And that's about all the piano lessons I had.
I can't imagine even learning music that way. It seems like you'd have to hear the notes as you were practicing the finger moves.
I agree, but that's the way they taught me how to play.
Well, no, it obviously worked, but we have another number. Now, you're going to play for us a song that everybody should be familiar with, Chattanooga Choo Choo. But you have some interesting effects that the viewers should look for. What are they?
Well, at Tin Pan Alley's golden age, there were a lot of interesting types of music that were coming along. Ragtime was coming along in the Missouri Valley. Jazz was coming along in New Orleans. And a new type of piano music was coming along in Texas and Oklahoma that eventually became known as boogie woogie. And there are a lot of boogie woogie tunes that are musical portraits of trains because of the rolling left hand. The popular song I'm going to play is probably the most popular song ever written about a train, and I'm going to play 2 choruses for you. And in between the 2 choruses, you'll hear up in the treble, we'll do some of those train effects, train whistles. You'll hear the train going up and down the track.
All right, we'll fade to black and listen to Chattanooga Choo Choo. We've just heard Chattanooga Choo Choo. That was very impressive. I know who wrote that song, Harry Warren and Mac Gordon. Chattanooga Choo Choo. Now, where would a fan that wants to hear this type of music go to hear it? Where would they find CDs? What would you recommend?
It's hard to find this music anymore at CD stores. They're all selling rap and hip hop. Most of the time, the recordings are produced by the artists and sold at their performances. Probably, if you're interested in ragtime or boogie woogie, the best bet would be to do an internet search on the term ragtime or boogie woogie and see what gets coughed up. One good source that I use, however, is Worlds, that's with an S, worldsrecords.com. I buy a number of records from them, and they have a very good catalog of older style jazz and ragtime.
Are there any particular recordings besides your own that you would recommend people to try to start out with?
No,
Too many?
no, there are really too many to talk about and too many styles. You sort of have to find for yourself what you like.
Okay, good enough. You're going to play a third number for us, and before we get to that, I'd like to know what your impressions are of Perry and Wyoming County. You visited us a number of times and looked around. What do you tell the folks at home?
Well, this is my fourth time here, and we always have a good time here. The folks here are very hospitable. They treat us well. There are a lot of interesting things to see. I remember you took us on an outing the last time we were here to a restored village.
Genesee Country Museum and Letchworth Park.
In Letchworth Park, we had a great time. It's a very relaxing place to visit, and we enjoy coming here.
Well, glad to have you. We're lucky to have you. What's the third number you're going to perform?
I'm going to perform a number in the Harlem Stride piano style, which was the principal jazz piano style of the 20s. It evolved out of the East Coast ragtime style, and it was played by people like Fats Waller and James P. Johnson at all-night parties in Harlem that were people would have these parties and charge admission and use it to pay their rent. They were called rent parties. And all of the pianists who played them were composers, and they had their own signature tunes, but the parties lasted all night. And in order to keep going for all night, they didn't have enough original compositions. They'd use popular songs of the day, and that's one I've picked. It's from 1928. It was originally written as a sentimental ballad by a man named Cliff Friend, but I think it makes a good stride piano piece, and the object of stride piano was to keep the party rolling, keep playing upbeat, fancy, outgoing music, and I've worked up that type of arrangement for you.
Okay, so the song is My Blackbirds Are Bluebirds Now, correct?
That's the title.
All right, we'll go to the song. Well, thank you, Tex. That was my Blackbirds Are Bluebirds Now played in the Harlem Stride style. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. I know when we tape this in early August, you're going on to perform elsewhere, Los Angeles, and I think New England, and in other locations in California. Anything you'd like to say to the folks before we go?
Nothing special except that I want to thank you all for bringing me back here to Perry. We always have a great time.
Well, we're glad to have you, and if you missed the concert, folks, you missed the show, maybe we can get them back. You'll have to ask. This is Letchworth Cable Access. I'm Kyle Adams-Zach. Our guest was Tex Wyndham, and we want to thank you for watching. Good night.